What is going on, Wild Nation? It is your main man, Charles Tank Harris, the founder and chief visionary officer of the financial literacy platform Wealth Our Way, where our motto is wealth is not only for the wealthy. I want to welcome each and every one of you to the Financial Power Hour. This is episode 29. Own nothing, control everything. I know y'all want to hear this one. But before we get into tonight's festivities, I have to practice the attitude of gratitude and say thank you to everyone who is here with us as we stream live across the Wealth Our Way Facebook page and the Wealth Our Way Network YouTube page. I also want to give the Wild Nation salute to the many members of Wild Nation. I am all one today who follow our program and look at the video after it's been recorded. They watch it on the weekends. They watch it on their lunch break, wherever they can squeeze their financial literacy fix in. And then a heartfelt how are you to the good folks on the Life 101 platform who listen to the audio recording of this very here program. Before we get into tonight's festivities, we know it's just the end of October. We are changing into fall. I have to say to everyone that it's been a great 2022 as opposed to the years we've had prior. And as we roll into 2023, we're going to close out the year with some great sessions, including tonight's, which is going to teach you how to protect your assets. But before we get into anything, we're going to kick off the promo.
I grew up in West Philly, and times was tough. Single mom, 4 kids, there was never enough. What's a youngin' to do? Join a gang or a crew, or go to school, hit the books, and find a mentor or two? God was on my side, moms was not with the games, so I studied extra hard, created a lane. Read books by Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham, spent time on Wall Street, and now I'm the man. But there's still much to do, and plenty to say, so I present the Power Hour, by Wealth Our Way. Enjoy the show.
I'm up for a Grammy if y'all didn't know. It's like, nah, it's not true at all. That's the furthest thing from the truth. I will never get a Grammy for that. But I'm going to redo it. It's going to make it hotter. We're going to get probably, I don't know, Kanye, if he gets back to his regular, gets back on his meds, we're going to have him produce the track, and we'll get Diddy to talk in the background. It's going to be crazy. But anyway, tonight, you know, you've heard me say on this program and on 15 Minutes of Finance and anywhere else that you've heard me speak that your network is your net worth. I have been blessed. Many of you who follow the Financial Power Hour and 15 Minutes of Finance are part of my network. You guys are all hailing from the mighty Temple University, TU, as we do. I am always moved, just so moved by the love that I get from my friends, my TU family that have gone on to do really, really big things like tonight's guest, that they take time out of their busy schedules to come help me spread financial literacy and other levels of financial information to our audience. And tonight's guest is my Temple sister, Kalimah White, JD, and not JD from down here in Atlanta. Money ain't a thing, JD. We talking Juris Doctorate, whatever it stands for to be a banging ass attorney. That's what my girl Kalimah is. Former practicing attorney, but now she works in the high net worth estate trust division of Key Family Wealth, Key Bank. And Kalimah, just welcome to the show. Tell the people about yourself, baby girl.
Thank you, Tank. I must say, I don't think I think you should be up for a Grammy because that was so dope. I really, truly liked that intro. I'm like, don't be holding selling yourself short. Somebody submitted, you never know what could happen. But
hey, Kobe got a Grammy for writing the book on basketball or something. So, but got rest in peace, Kobe the Bean. But I thank you so much. That makes me feel good. You're going to start the show off with a big smile on my face. I appreciate you.
Definitely. But thank you for having me on your show because I love what you're doing with regard to education and financial literacy and even deeper than that, right? like a topic like we're going to talk about, tonight, trust, like people feel like so esoteric, but it is the bread and butter and everyday thing that we all should be thinking about at some point.
100%.
But just, a little bit about me, like you said, I'm a recovering practicing attorney because I started in litigation before I went to trust and estates.
Okay.
So I did trust litigation, estate litigation, and when just working in the trust and estates and tax area, I just feel like it was something that really helps me help more people. Yes. And so litigation was good, and it's good to know, but it's all, to me, like I said, trust and estates and this financial area is the bread and butter of life, and not enough of us are in it and know about it.
So in your role at Key Bank, tell me a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, so in my role at Key Bank, I just started with Key in February of 2022, so this year, and I'm really excited because one of the things that we do is that we help business owners sell their businesses.
Oh, wow.
We help them position, the way that businesses should be sold, like making sure that their business is, is in a way that will be able to maximize the sale price. And then we help them do trust and tax planning around their business to maximize the tax savings as well. And then we, help them set up these trusts, and then we manage those trusts for them. So we do that from soup to nuts with regard to business owners and high net worth individuals.
That is a beautiful thing. I work with people on all rungs of the financial ladder. That was one of the reasons why I founded Wealth Our Way, was to go back into the community that I was raised in and help people who maybe, my son asked me yesterday, I got to laugh about this. He's heard me say over and over again, I grew up on food stamps. Mm-hmm. And I guess he got tired of hearing it and not knowing what it meant. So finally yesterday he said, Dad, what are food stamps? And I cracked up laughing. I was like, well, hey, thank God my son don't know what food stamps is. But I realized he didn't not know what food stamps are because we do well financially. He doesn't know what food stamps are because food stamps don't exist anymore, I guess.
Right, the actual book of stamps that we used to have to go and take and rip off one and all that. Yeah,
with people knowing what it's so much. And I love the fact that we are so much more socially conscious and conscious in this day and age than before. You got a card that looks like you got an American Express card and it's welfare. Whereas when I was younger, I had to rip the book open in the store line and everybody knew what it was. But to that extent, also, let's just say, the store I was in, everybody next to me was ripping their book off too. So it was cool. Right. So
you were lucky to have that one food stamp when somebody gave you.
I was just all day.
All cookies day. With that.
At Temple, we could go down to Progress Plaza, Poverty Plaza, and buy food stamps. So it was all good. Exactly. I bring that up to say, dealing with people on all rungs of the financial ladder, whether it's people who I grew up with, whether it's people I went to college with like yourself, or people who are just making 9-figure sales of businesses. I've now had the benefit of seeing it all, but I realized that we all have the same concerns. It's like they teach you in football. Everybody, no matter how great an athlete they are, we still need to block and tackle. We need the fundamentals. So you want to make sure in finances that you are putting the most dollars in your pocket. Now, if you're on the lower end of the financial spectrum, that means making sure you're going to work, getting the proper deductions, on your tax return, not spending too much on your expenses. If it's for the clientele that you're seeing at Key, it's putting together trust, making sure that you're minimizing taxes, because we do legally have to pay taxes, but we're under no obligation to pay more than what's legally required.
Exactly.
So I want to just jump right into it because I subtitled tonight's program, Own Nothing, Control Everything. It's an acronym that I heard maybe 25 years ago when I first got into financial services about the ability to have access or control over your finances and not be in a position where, whether it's through a divorce, whether it's through a lawsuit, whether it's through incapacitation, lose any of your money. And the number one thing that I've always seen as the key tool you need is a trust. So talk to me about what a trust is and how a trust works.
Right. Well, so there are a lot of different sort of trust out there, right? And ways to do, different things. But like I said, I think what you mentioned about the fundamentals, right? But fundamentally, all trusts work the same, right? It's, basically a legal document. It's created by an individual or entity that they call the grantor, and it gives authority to a third party, which they call a trustee, to manage and control the assets, right, that are held in this trust, for the benefit of the grantor or a third party, which they call the beneficiary, right? So, the three aspects of a trust: the grantor, the trustee, the beneficiaries, and the stuff that you put inside of a trust, right? I always like to look at it like a box. It's just really a box where you put things in, you put an instruction on it. And in order to be able to get advantages and the different advantages, it depends on what the structure of that box is. It depends on whether or not you can get into that box all the time. It depends on whether or not you can't get into that box all the time. So, so fundamentally, it is basically just a contract between you, with a grantor creating that trust, and a third party, a trustee, for the benefit of either yourself or someone else.
That leads me to a very interesting question that I realized until you just started talking, I don't know the answer to. And they say, I watch a lot of Law and Order. They say, never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But I don't think I'm getting any trouble here. I know I'm amongst friends.
You're not. You're good.
when you have a trust document, so someone comes to Key, they hire Key to be their, creator of their trust, and maybe even be the person who's going to be the corporate trustee, whatever the case may be. After the trust is created, we figure out what assets we're going to put into it to fund it. We know who the beneficiaries are, who's going to benefit from it. What happens to that trust? Does the trust have to be registered with a state, or does it just sit in a safe deposit box for when it's time to be used? What happens with the trust?
And that is a really good question, right? Because a lot of people think that trusts are like deeds or something like that have, because it's basically said a deed of trust, right?
Yes.
But it's not like that. The great thing about trust is because it does maximize privacy. So there's no recording type of, requirements for a trust. It really truly is a private contract between the person creating the trust and, an individual or a corporate entity, because you can have an individual trustee or corporate trustee. So it is a private contract. And that's one of the great things about it. And that's why a lot of people use it, right? Even like an LLC, you have to register an LLC. Yes. With the trust, you don't have to do that. It's between you and the trustee.
That's great. I just talking with a client the other day about trust work, and they wanted to put some assets in the trust. So let's just say, let's hypothetically walk through this particular client. This particular client decides they're going to invest in a company, and they're giving the company $100,000 in exchange for the $100,000 that they're giving the company. The company is giving them 1,000 shares of their privately held stock, because the company's not public. And instead of the client taking those stocks in their individual name, they say, my trust is going to own the stock. So they put the money in the trust.
Yep.
The trust bought the stock from the company, and the company gave the stock to the trust. So now, fast forward 9 years from now, my client decides to beat up somebody in the street, and that person says, I'm suing you for putting your hands on me, and I want everything you own. And they just happen to know that the person they beat up, they were familiar with them. So they were like, I remember you invested in that company. It's got to be worth millions now. I want your company stock. Right. So they sue them. And they're in court saying, hey, this woman owns 1,000 shares of this. But when they do an inventory of her assets, they won't see the 1,000 shares of that, because she doesn't own it. Now, at that point in time, is it the burden on her to show her trust and say these assets are shielded? Or if that person is naming those assets, does that person have to prove she actually individually owned them?
So I think, that is a good way to sort of us talk about a couple of different concepts, right? Because a lot of people, it really depends on what type of trust you have, whether or not you can protect assets. You cannot protect assets with a revocable trust, right? So if you just have, and a lot of people think, well, I have a trust. If you just have a revocable trust, like a lot of times people set up a revocable trust, they would do like what we call a pour over will. Like people will have a will, but that will say, put all my assets when I die into this revocable trust. And a revocable trust doesn't come irrevocable until you die. You cannot get any creditor protection, or you don't get any type of sort of real tax benefits from a revocable trust. You can avoid probate. right? You can get, you can get incapacity plan. And so if something were to happen to you and you were still alive, then, your trust will kick in. But you don't get any type of asset protection unless you have an irrevocable trust. And at that point, it really depends on what type of irrevocable trust you have, depending on whether or not you can protect it from a creditor. If you have an irrevocable trust that you set up for yourself, right? So you took so like in your scenario, that $100,000 you put into an irrevocable trust in a state like Delaware, where you are looking at and you're saying, okay, this is a Delaware a self-settled Delaware asset protection trust that I am setting up. That trust is going to go and invest in this, and if you're doing it that way, then you can protect it. But if you did it in New York and you had a self-settled trust, just an irrevocable trust, you're not going to be able to protect that. So it really depends on where you put that trust and what laws because each state has different laws with regard to trust. Okay.
And if you started in one state and ended up in another state, is it the state of formations laws that take priority?
The thing about irrevocable trust is that it's its own entity, right? So it's its own entity in the sense of so it's an own entity in creation and structure, right? Now, you can have a trust, an irrevocable trust, that it's not its own entity for tax purposes, meaning that all of the taxes flow to you. And there are reasons and advantages for that. But if you have a trust that its own irrevocable trust, it's its own entity. It has its own, EIN number, TIN, number. So in that sense, it depends on the state where it was set up. So I can be a person in Pennsylvania and set up a trust in Delaware. That trust is a Delaware trust, and the laws of Delaware, that's what controls. And so that's why it's very important. So, what we do a lot in Delaware, because I do a lot of Delaware trust work and work a lot with, managing and administering and marketing trust within the Delaware law, even though I'm a Pennsylvania lawyer by training, TU, Temple University. Undergrad and law school. Thank you very much.
Well, the double dip. We got to take credit for that.
Exactly. So if you're looking at it, like that, you definitely have to it really depends on what you want and what your goal is, where you should put your trust. If you're not looking for, like, for instance, I have a client who has a Pennsylvania self-settled trust, right? He's young, right? So when they set it up for him, he was young. So they did it in Pennsylvania and that was fine. They didn't, have any issues, but now he's getting older, right? He's thinking about getting married and things of that nature. I always say an ex-spouse is just a creditor. That's really true. Right?
I know that's right. I've been there, done that.
Been there, done that. And so, in that sense that, I want to move now that he's older, I want to move his trust from Pennsylvania to Delaware. And revise it. And there are ways you can modify these trusts that you're already set up, move it to Delaware to give him that self-settled asset protection law in this trust now that he'll have here in Delaware. So that because right now he's not married, but if he does get married, we want to be able to protect that because you can protect assets in a trust from a future divorced spouse, but you can't protect it from the spouse that you have right now. So you can't hide it.
Right.
But if you're planning to get married, you might want to think, okay, let me set up this trust over here along with the prenuptial agreement, belt and suspenders, and then you could protect it from a future spouse.
Yeah, that was one of the things, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I think it's important to discuss my working with professional athletes.
Right. And
in that space, there's such economic disparity between spouses. And when there is such an economic disparity, as you use the term, I'm going to keep that in my mental Rolodex, just another creditor.
Just a creditor.
Yep, just another creditor. What I saw, I always told people, so, prenuptial agreement, everybody throws it around. And I was always very vocal to my ball player clients that a prenuptial agreement does not give them the protection they may think it gives them because, we're ignoring the first three letters of the prenuptial agreement, which is prenuptial. Right. Normally, and I know you're, I pray that you'll, elaborate on what I'm about to say. everything is state to state, and I understand that. But in general, whatever I make while we're married is, as they say, fruits of the marriage. So if I sign $100 million contract with the 76ers while we're married, you that's some money you're going to come after. That's even though I was playing basketball before I met you. I've even seen now in detail that the money that was earned on the money that was made on a contract while we were married is also fruits of the marriage. So talk to me about, because that's what people really want when they come on the show or tune into the show. How could this possibly help me? How could this protect me? So I'm in a situation where I'm about to get married. And I'm concerned that I may marry someone who we're not equally yoked financially. What would be the best structure for me? Would it be a prenuptial and a trust together? And how would I strategize to do that?
I think it definitely would be, some type of trust structure in the prenuptial agreements. I think are always very important, right? Because to me, prenuptial agreements set the intention that you are not looking to commingle your assets together. Right. And so that's what courts are looking at, right? Family courts and divorce courts are courts of equity. They're looking to be, equitable in that situation. So if you guys sort of decided from the beginning that this wasn't, you weren't going to commingle assets, courts look at that. But then if you also have a trust that you set up with assets that you have prior to your marriage, right? So say, for instance, like, you are, someone who has a contract, you got, money or whatever prior to you getting married, you might want to put those assets in the trust, but you can't really give away and put in a trust the thoughts of that maybe you might get income, right? It has to be a tangible asset. So it has to be something that's sort of, tangible. There may be a situation where, if you can get a little bit creative, that, you might be able to put a contract within the trust, but that means now the trust is, holds that contract. And so that might be something that you can do. But for the most part, it's more like if you have the, $25 million, and that's what you have right now, you might want to put those assets into what we call a self-settled domestic asset protection trust. And I say in Delaware, because I'm in Delaware, and be able, and there are other states that you can do that, right? South Dakota is a good state for asset protection trust, Nevada, Alaska, and there's some other states that have good asset protection trust laws, but Delaware, for me, is the one that has the case law with regard to these types of trusts, and really has a really robust, legal and financial industry that supports this type of creditor protection.
When you say self-settled, can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah. Self-settled means that I own it. Okay. So think about it. So a lot of times there's like two types of trust in that thought process. There's a self-settled trust and there's a third-party trust. If you set up a trust for your kids, they are beneficiary of a trust. That's a third-party trust because somebody else set that up for them. Mm-hmm. So they get protection from that. So we always tell a lot of our clients, if you are looking to give part of your business to your kid, to your son or to your daughter, and you may not like who their, future spouse is going to be, you might want to set up that trust, for them with those assets, put those business assets in a trust, and they'll be able to then get that protection, right? Because having so I can't protect my assets, my own assets, from a creditor unless it's in some type of self-settled situation. But if I have a trust for which I'm a beneficiary that somebody else set up for me, then you can get creditor protection there.
That's great information. What we talked about, revocable and irrevocable trusts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on the difference between the two? When I was at New York Life, we used to do a lot of ILITs, irrevocable life insurance trust, but I know there are other irrevocable trusts. So can you just kind of talk about the difference between the two?
Yeah. And so, like I said, the difference between that is really important because I think some people, are like, oh, I have a trust. So, why can't I protect it or however? But it definitely has to be an irrevocable trust. And that makes sense, right? If I can, the government is not going to give you protection from something that you can just keep constantly changing whenever you want to, and you can terminate whenever you want to. And a revocable trust can be terminated whenever what the name says, right? It's revocable. You can take it back whenever you want to. An irrevocable trust, you really can't do that without doing some work. Now, there are ways to modify these trusts and change them, but there are structural things that you have to do. And it really depends on the state that the trust is in. Like in Delaware, trusts are easily modified. If the person creating the trust is alive, it really truly, like, you can modify almost on every provision of a trust. But so that is very important, right? So revocable trust, they don't really give you anything, but like you said, they avoid probate. They maintain privacy, right, of your estate, because people tend to forget wills are public once you die. So if they go to probate a will and they put a will, they take it to the court and say, I'm probating this will. Everybody can see it. That's why you can see the celebrities' wills, right? Everybody, yep. Right. So if you have a revocable trust when you die, then you don't have to worry about that. So it gives you that, privacy. But irrevocable trust provides asset protection, like we're talking about.
When you talked earlier, you talked about a pour over will. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you shed some light for our audience on what that means?
Yeah. So it's always important, even if you have a trust, to have a will, right? You have to have a will that comes along with that, because for one thing, sometimes trust, in order for it to have something, it has to own it. Right. So you have to be proactive in putting that. You have to sign paperwork to assign or gift or sell those assets to a trust. Your will basically says that any assets that I own anywhere. So that's why even if you have, say, for instance, a plan where it has a revocable trust, you always have to have what we call a pour over will anyway, because it takes care of all the things that you might have forgot to put into the name of the trust.
Right.
Right. So, when you go to probate, basically when you die, right? Because that's what will happen to all of us. I know some people don't want to talk about it.
We're going to be dead, and then we're going to probate.
Right. We're going to be dead, and somebody else going to be probating that. Right? So, so when you die, you need that part of it, because maybe you forgot to put something in your revocable trust, right? So you want to make sure that it all pours over into your revocable trust, so there's nothing left in your estate. Because if there are assets left in your estate, for one, people will know about it. It won't be it will be public, once it's probated, and then also two, it's a situation where you won't have control over it as easily as you would have in a revocable trust, because once you die, it pours over to the revocable trust. All the assets that you have, because that's what that pour over will says, it goes into the revocable trust, and the trustee of that trust will be able to do whatever it needs to do. If you are probating something, you have to wait to go, for your executor or your executor to get letters of executrix, right? Letters or authority to do things. So that causes a lot of issues and delays a lot as well.
I have a question. It seems as though I'm going to have you explain what a trustee is, who can be a trustee, and then just talk about what makes you choose a trustee over, one person over another, or an entity over a person. So What is a trustee?
Right. A trustee is basically the individual or entity, because it can be a corporate or individual, who has the fiduciary. You give them the duty, right? So it's a fiduciary duty, meaning that it's a legal duty, right? Somebody can sue them if they breach it. That you give them the duty to ensure that your instructions in that trust is coming to fruition, right? So that's basically what a trustee is, right? They must abide by the terms of the trust document. They must if they have the responsibility for the investments of the trust, they must, make sure that that is, that is correct, like, according to like the Prudent Investor Act and things of that nature, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Yep. So all of those things, it has to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries, right? So it basically truly is a fiduciary that has, it's like a parent. That's basically what a trustee is. And, in a lot of situations, like you said, you can have an individual or you can have a corporate.
So when I think of having an irrevocable trust and I think of a trustee, so I'm going to use a hypothetical situation because I think that might help the audience a little better. Yeah. So if I want to keep assets away from creditors, I want to keep assets away from an ex-spouse, I want to keep, I want the full protection that a trust can give me. So I have to make this trust irrevocable because, as Kalimah touched on earlier, if you can just control the trust and do whatever you want to it, then the government is not going to think that that's something that was out. We in finance, we say at risk. It has to be at risk in order for you to get. You
have to give something up in order for them to give you those benefits.
Can't keep the control over it. But because the trustee does have control, what's the situation of picking a trustee that I know will do what I want them to do?
That is exactly what you should do. Right? Especially if it's an individual trustee, right? I mean, and put it this way, for the most part, and depending on, and it's definitely a conversation, way surpassing what we're talking about right now. But there are, like you said, there's always levels to this, right? Yeah. Depending on what you want. If you want sort of maximum, tax advantages, you may need to give up more control. If you're looking for, and if you want an individual trustee, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And you can be in a situation where you can, have that individual trustee work with you in the sense of understanding what your thoughts and wants are. And a lot of times you should sort of write that down. You can always do what we call a letter of wishes to supplement that with the trust, right? Tell the trustee all the things that you want, not in the trust document, because they don't have to follow it. But these are the things that I want, right? And you can do that with an individual, or a corporate trustee, but you can't be in the situation of looking like you're colluding.
Got it.
Right? You don't want to be in that situation where somebody can prove that, don't be like those January 6 people and keep texting your friend who's your individual trustee. Yeah, don't give Robert that because I don't like, don't do that.
Don't have your trust on the episode of the first 48.
Right. Don't do that. Don't do that.
So I remember when I used to set up an irrevocable life insurance trust. Yeah. We had what was called the crummy test, where you had to leave the money in the trust for 30 days or 31 days, one or the other, so that once again, it was at risk. The beneficiaries could say, oh, there's money in this trust.
Right.
I want it. Instead of, oh, there's money in the trust that's supposed to pay a life insurance premium. Let it pay the premium.
Right.
What other types of hurdles, or is the crummy test? Let me rephrase my question. Is the crummy test just germane to irrevocable life insurance trust, or is that something that always has to pass muster every time you put something into a trust?
Right. The crummy powers that you would put in a trust is a tax thing, right? And you put it in there, and the reason why they do it in a life insurance trust is because you're not really giving away a present interest. In order to get the tax benefits, you have to give away a present interest. And, the crummy test is really a court case. That's the crummy case. And it basically, said that in order to get that present interest, you have to be able to give, the beneficiaries this notice that they have, the right to withdraw, funds after, a certain amount of time. So it's really just a tax construction.
Got it. Right.
So you don't really need it. Some trusts don't have crummy powers because they don't really have to have that, that issue. You can have, an irrevocable, a lifetime, right? So to me, I can set up a trust during my life, which is a lifetime irrevocable trust for many reasons, right? People do that for, like you said, asset protection. So you can have a domestic asset protection trust. People do that for legacy planning, having a dynasty trust, right? Setting up a trust where you aren't the beneficiary of that trust. Your kids and your grandkids and your grandkids' kids and this is what the Rockefellers and JP Morgan, this is what they do. And they're able to then have a trust like that never terminate forever.
Yes.
And that trust then is never paying estate tax, right? Because it's never going into somebody's estate. So you're able to then, it's that compounding of it. And you're able to have that grow and grow and grow. And then, you can have your beneficiaries living off of those trusts for years.
For years,
right?
centuries.
So all of these things and all of the provision, that's why, people are like, oh, can I just go on like LegalZoom and get a trust? Like all of those provisions mean something. They're tied to court cases.
Right.
That's why they're there. And so people have to understand. So if you don't have somebody who understands and can really interpret that, you have something in this trust that may not, do what you want it to do. So it's very important to understand what your goal is and be able to then, have attorneys draft to that goal.
That makes a lot of sense. Something you touched on. I know from my experience in finances that trust, and you touched on it earlier when you said TIN, which is a tax identification number. A trust will have one of those. A trust is its own entity, and just like every individual has a social security number.
An irrevocable trust is.
Yes, it has its own TIN and has to have a tax ID number. With that being the case, I know that there are corporate tax rates, individual tax rates. There are also trust tax rates.
Yep.
Do trusts get the same benefit on its investments as individuals do with capital gains?
Trust. So for fiduciary taxation, meaning, taxation of trust can be very complicated, but, so that's why it's always very important to do an analysis, right? So an analysis of the benefit of a trust, because trust rates they start at the higher rate starts at a lower amount, a much lower amount.
Okay.
Right. So really, sometimes the benefit of a trust may be outweighed by the fact that you're paying more taxes on it because it's in the trust. But if you want to protect it from a creditor and you want to do that, and that's your goal, or your goal is to save on state income taxes by, putting these assets. So say, for instance, you're going to sell your business, right? And so you have a business, you're looking, to sell it. Your business, you put your business into some type of trust in a state like Delaware that, allows for a trust to be able to save on state income taxes, right? So if you have no beneficiaries in your trust in Delaware and you are able to then, sell something in there, those trusts do not pay, capital gains tax on any accumulated income within those trusts. And so if you're looking at it that way, you always have to really think about what your goal is, right? And then sometime too, you have to balance all the different advantages that you can get from it. So there's a lot of different ways, to look at it. But if your goal is to then be able to save on state income taxes, you have to think about what state that you want to put your trust. If your goal is for legacy planning, you have to make sure you have a trust that, there's no longer, in a state where there's no what we call rule against perpetuities, right? The RAP law, right? I mean, it's basically saying that you can have a trust that lasts into perpetuity forever and ever and ever. So there's a lot of different ways and that's why it's very important to have an advisor, because people feel like, well, I can just, I can read an article in the Wall Street Journal and just figure this out myself. And it can be very, very complex.
I would imagine. So one of the things that when I think about trust, and we talked just briefly about giving things into the trust, normally when you enter into a contract, it starts off with the words "for value received." So when you're entering into this contract to give things into your trust, you said it at the beginning of our program. What do you do you have to sell something to your trust, or are you using your gift exemption? What are you doing when you decide, hey, I own this $1 million house outright in the name of Charles Harris, but I wanted to go into this trust now? What do I have to get, give, or sign to put it into this trust?
It really depends, right? Okay. So if you have $1 million house and you want to, so say for instance, you have your full exemption, right? You know, the $12.06 million that we all have right now, which will sunset in 2026 to $5 million. So people need to think about that. Right. People are like, oh, well, I don't have $5 million. Some people have $5 million worth of insurance, and life insurance is estate taxable, even though it's not income taxable. I had a fight with a litigator one time about this. Oh, well, life insurance isn't taxable. I said, well, not income tax.
Income tax, but it's still part of your estate. That's the whole reason we do eyelids.
That's the whole reason you do eyelids, right? You know what I mean? So, you know, I think in that situation, it definitely is, you know, something that, you know, to think about.
So when you're going back to, I know our guests are probably like, I just went to this and they talked to eyelids.
I know, we're everywhere.
Going back to that question of, I have an exemption right now.
Yeah.
Let's say it's $12 million, but I'm still using, and this is actually knowledge for me. So let me say, audience, this is something I do not know the answer to, and Kalimah is about to educate me on this. From a bookkeeping standpoint, a record keeping standpoint, we think 12 million, that is a huge number. But if I start giving stuff away and start using that exemption, who's keeping track of that? Like if I gave $2 million away this year, now I only have $10 million of my exemption left. And then I decided to give away 11 million, 3 years later. Who, I know the IRS is the ultimate answer, but who and how do I keep track of my gift allowances and exemptions?
Yeah, so that's what we're saying. If you're, putting, like you said, $1 million house into a trust, you're doing it like via either gift, or you can sell it, because some people want to sell it because they don't want to have to use their exemption, right? But if you have sufficient exemption, you can then gift it, to a trust. And really, who should be keeping track of that is your accountant or or your attorney, whoever is filing your gift tax returns. Because even though you don't have to pay gift taxes or pay the tax because you have that exemption, right? You have to tell the IRS that you use some of your exemption.
That's what I was getting at. So we're in 2022.
Yeah,
I own a business that we just had a professional valuation company come in and say it's worth $6 million. And I decided to give half. I got 6 kids, just as happenstance would have it. I want to give each kid 1/6 of the business. So I just give each of them $1 million. Yep. I would, in that year, file a gift return saying I gave $6 million away. And now I know moving forward until it sunsets, I have $6 million of exemption left. Now, let's really confuse our guests and say, I gave away $6 million of the $12 million I'm allowed to today. And now we get to 2020
and $24 million together for a married couple. So
for a married couple, exactly. So let's say I'm single.
Being married, one of them.
One of the benefits, one of the few. So, let's say I'm single. I got the 12 million. I give away 6. And now we get to 2027 where the exemption, let's say, it doesn't get rolled. It drops back down to 5. Right. I'm just a lucky dog that I used 6 while it was still legal, but I've technically now used all the exemption I can use at this point in my life. Anything else I gift, I have to pay a tax on.
Right. And that's why we are, telling people, and that's why, last year around September time, when, there were proposals and policies basically saying that we're going to change that right now. Right. We're not going to wait until it sunsets. We're going to change it right now. And people were scrambling to set up trust, to be able to give away the $12 million, because when it sunsets, they're not going to be able to give that away. But if you gave away $12 million before it sunset, you're good.
You're good.
So, it's not like, you have to go back and now pay the tax. You just have to make sure you do it. Like, I think there was in 2010 where there was no estate or gift tax.
Yeah.
Where people who died in that, like, some people were like, look, if somebody is really, really sick, can they just die?
It's funny you say that, but this is why I'm such an advocate. I'm such an avid Law and Order watcher because Dick Wolf is a monster. He's the producer of Law and Order. So many of his episodes of Law and Order are snatched from real life examples. And there was a Law and Order episode that dealt just with that issue. There was not to go off topic too much, but it's still really on topic.
Right.
There were a rash of deaths at this one particular hospital.
Right.
Like 7 consecutive deaths were happening, and it just seemed odd. Like people who weren't as sick as someone who should die was dying all of a sudden, and they realized that it was one person who happened to know an estate attorney, and the estate attorney's clients were coming to the estate attorneys like, we need this person to die in this year. And the estate attorney had a hookup with the doctor, and the doctor was killing them off so they could die that year and the families could get their money tax-free. And I was like, Dick Wolf will just bring any topic to Law and Order and make it an exciting.
And the estate tax is like 40%. So that's a big deal.
It was a big deal. There were people like, the one lady was like, I got caught, but it was worth it. Like,
Exactly.
I may be going to jail, but I got $47 extra million.
Right. Exactly. So I mean, so all of those things are considerations that, like, people like me, like I work for a bank. We advise our clients on tax and legal issues, but we also work with their attorneys on that because we don't draft documents, right? I don't draft documents anymore. And so we work with attorneys to draft documents. We work with their CPAs and their other advisors, their other financial advisors, even in that situation, depending on the situation we have with the client. So, we work with all of the different advisors to sort of try to, depending on the situation, sometimes to be a quarterback to help them. And because we are, for the most part, we work with our clients, we invest their assets. That's what Key Bank does in a wealth management shop. So we invest their assets. So we're giving them this tax and tax planning advice, for free. In that sense, because they're a client of ours, right? And so with regard to the trust, if we're setting up a trust for them, we'll also be their corporate trustee, we'll administer their trust, and that's a fee as well. But all of the holistic planning that our clients will get, they will get all of that, if they are one of our investment clients.
That's great. You brought up 2 examples. I'm currently working with a very wealthy family on an estate. Well, a state tax issue, and it goes right to the heart of what you're talking about. There's so many people at this table, and and people have differing opinions. They're like, oh, well, we don't think this tool works, and sometimes there are ulterior motives. They rather the investment guy have the money instead of the insurance person, or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, as you started by saying, what are we trying to accomplish here, and then what vehicle will best help us accomplish it? I want to kind of go backwards a little bit and talk about corporate trustees. I think of the movie Brewster's Million, where the 2 attorneys were like, they didn't want him to get his full inheritance because they would have went to the firm. I think, people, especially from our community, may have a lot of distrust for financial institutions and more distrust for a corporate trustee. But I love the concept of a corporate trustee. First of all, I feel as though even though we hold trustees to a fiduciary responsibility, individuals are individuals and they're going to slip sometimes. But if you're trained in this area, now you have, as we like to use the term, belts and suspenders. We have the right that we know, the obligation we know we're supposed to act at, but we also have the training that says, this is what you do. This is how you act. Right. I think the downside for people when they look at a corporate trustee is they don't feel like they'll care enough about them the way their auntie would or their uncle would. Right. What would you say to anyone deciding between a corporate trustee and an individual family member or friend?
I would say they don't have to decide between. They can have both. So they can have co-trustees, and we have that routinely. We have, a co-trustee with another family member. Sometimes, that works really well. And so, and maybe, especially in a trust like in Delaware, where Delaware Trust can be so innovative because they bifurcate duties. So you can have a situation where it's okay. The individual trustee is the only one who has the power to make distributions. Okay. Right. But the corporate trustee is the one that is, sort of given the situs to Delaware, right? Making it okay for you to have your trust in Delaware because they're in Delaware. The corporate trustee is, administering things day to day, doing the statements, doing the other stuff. And you can have a situation where the corporate or even you have an individual trustee and a corporate trustee, but then you have another advisor, a trust protector, right? Who could be like the lawyer or someone else who is sort of looking over everybody and making sure. And then also too, in a trust like that, you can also be your own investment advisor. So you can control the investments in the trust. So there are so many different things that you can do. And I'm so glad that you brought up that, that point with sort of, your clients like athletes and things of that nature. I've been doing Delaware trust and I've been in the Delaware market for many, many years. And I just do not see these advantages of these types of trusts really being put out to, the masses of people.
Right.
And getting them to understand the advantages of these long-term trusts, these asset protection trusts, and all these things that they can do. So this is one of my missions, is to educate our people.
I love it.
About it because, we're making money.
We're making a lot of money these days.
We're getting a lot of money. And we have to be able to protect that. Long term how are we going to, how I feel about trying to, reduce to eliminate the racial wealth gap.
Yes.
How are we going to do that without intergenerational planning? We cannot do that if each generation, our families are starting over.
Yeah. And that's where, my boy Kamari talks about it needs to be more than just financial literacy.
Yeah.
Financial comprehension is his word, where like it's, literacy just means you can read, but comprehension means you understand it. And
you implement it.
And implement it, can make it. And I heard the boy Kanye on a rant the other night that was actually pretty interesting. But he says, I don't like implementation. I like actualization. I like to see it actually happen. Like I like to see it realization. And
tomato. That's ridiculous.
But here's the thing, though. I've had many things implemented that didn't produce the result I desired. So the reality is that if we don't and so it's funny.
You have to implement and adjust. You can't ever implement and sit down. So there's always a situation. And that's why we say, with your estate plans, you have to make sure you review them at least every 3 years. I have clients who had estate plans from, 1996. I'm like, all types of laws have changed. Like you can't have that formula clause in there. The IRS doesn't like that. Right now they don't. So implementation is the definition of means put it into action. Always have to look at it and adjust and be flexible. And that's why you have to have a trust that can be flexible. And people think irrevocable, that can't be flexible. No, put it in a place like Delaware where it can be flexible and you can change that thing whenever you want to.
Yeah, I used to, one of the biggest things that we used to look at when we did Irrevocable trust, life insurance was we were using cash value life insurance. We wanted the grantor, we wanted the person who took the policy out to enjoy the cash value while they were alive, but we wanted the death benefit to go to their heirs without being included in their estate. So we put it in a revocable trust. And it was as simple as putting language in there for the trustee to say, you can disperse any cash value that's in this, call it 8% or 16% or put a dollar amount on these particular times. And so now it's still not like the insured has any control. They just wrote it into the trust and the trustee is just following the instructions, but it allowed you to benefit from that cash value while you were still alive.
I had a colleague that said just recently, I thought it was a really good point he made. He was like, the only thing, he said the next best thing to owning something is controlling it.
Yes.
And that, and that is basically where we are because, you can't own things and, get the creditor protection, get the tax advantages all the time, but you can structure these things. If you structure in advance, if you do these things in advance, then you'll be able to structure them in a way where you can control them or have people that you trust control them, and then be in a situation to be able to benefit and also get benefits
Right.
from them. Like, say, yeah. So it's like, if you have something like what we call a spousal lifetime access trust, right?
Yes. Slap.
So people, slats, like people, love those as well. And, and only if your marriage is good.
Yeah.
Only if your marriage is good. Don't do it if
which is a whole nother show. We got to do another show on good
marriage.
marriage.
It's a whole nother show.
Those unicorns.
Right. But in that sense, so you can be able to have a trust where you're the grantor, you set it up, but have your spouse be the beneficiary, and then your spouse will be able to get funds from it to support your lifestyle. And you can get those benefits as well. So there's so many things to do.
That's why I would elaborate on what your friend said about the next best thing to owning something to be controlling it. I would say it's even better to control it, because owning it comes with its own openings to liability. But if I can control it and own nothing, going back to the acronym, that's great. I learned that when I first became a stockbroker back at Smith Barney in March of '98. I got my license. I was still doing bodyguard work for a very wealthy woman in Montgomery County, PA, and she had no children, but all of her friends were also wealthy and they had children, and they would clearly sit around and talk about these things. And she said, yeah, Tank, money allows you to still get people to do what you want them to do, even when you're dead. And I didn't understand that because I was a poor dude at that point in time. I was starting to embark upon my money-making life. But, control is very important for people. And you can get $15,000 every time you show up to Nanny's grave site on her birthday and put flowers on the grave. Go down to Edelman and Weinstein's office and pick your check up, because I wrote it in the trust that's exactly what happens when you go there every 27th of August. Exactly. It's just amazing. Like, people are very, very much into control, very much into, I work hard, I got this money, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Because too,
it's always, what statistically, by the second or third generation, money is gone.
Gone.
Yep. But it's gone. So, and it doesn't matter how much money it really was, it's just gone, right? So it's education about what's happening with this money and with the family is very, very important, for your, legacy planning that way. But then there's also too very important, say the dead hand of the grave, always, controlling things. But it's always but you have to do it in advance.
Yeah.
And you can't do it by the time you got dementia or something like that, right?
You got to be of sound mind and body.
You got to be of sound mind, to do it. So, and using all types of structures. So, having a trust where that is, you have an LLC that the trust owns the LLC, but you're the manager of that LLC, and you are being able to do all the things that you need to do with regard to those assets, open accounts and do the things. But when it comes to sort of tax issues, a trust owns it. When it comes to creditor protection, trust owns it. So not only you got to get through that LLC, as you have to get through the trust first and then get through the LLC if you want to get to the asset. So layering, and you can do it. So a trust can own a trust.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Like layering it all. So let's just put as many, layers of protection around it. But we have to do it in advance. We can't just, wake up one day and, and we done hit somebody in a car and be like, oh, let me now try to go.
I love it. I thank you so much for coming on tonight. I'm going to something you just said about money being gone in 3 generations reminds me of a it's like a story. I'm not going to tell the story. I'm going to give the heart of the story. Person said that, and I'll be gender unfair and say men, said that tough times make strong men. Strong men create easy times, and easy times create weak men. And that's where we see generational wealth get lost.
If you put adults in there, that would definitely work, because that's what it is about. That's adults.
What happens.
I mean, it is. It's about, because it don't matter if you're a man or a woman. You got to be an adult.
I agree.
Got to be an adult.
It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Please come back. See us here on the Financial Power Hour. We love you guys and girls out here in the audience. I hope you took notes. I hope you got all the information you need. Producer, take us home.